Today's episode is brought to you by Conceiving with Fertility Awareness, a free online course designed to help you utilize fertility awareness strategies to optimize your chances of conceiving naturally. From timing sex accurately every time to identifying potential fertility issues through charting, this course has you covered. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/TTC for access. TTC as in trying to conceive. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/TTC. This episode is brought to you by the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook, the first beautifully designed, fully customizable paper charting workbook designed with you in mind. With 3 years worth of charting pages, the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook has you covered. If you've been looking for a solid alternative to charting apps, you'll love this charting workbook. The Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Workbook is available in both Fahrenheit and Celsius editions, and it's available in spiral-bound, paperback, and ebook versions. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/workbook to order your copy today. That's fertilityfriday.com/workbook. This is the Fertility Friday podcast, episode number 298. Welcome to the Fertility Friday podcast, your source for information about the fertility awareness method and all things fertility. I'm your host, Lisa Hendrickson-Jack. I'm the author of The Fifth Vital Sign and the Fertility Awareness Mastery Charting Journal. I'm a certified fertility awareness educator and holistic reproductive health practitioner with nearly 20 years of experience teaching women to connect to their fifth vital sign through menstrual cycle charting, balancing hormonal health, and optimizing the menstrual cycle without hormones. I'm outspoken about hormonal birth control and its impact on fertility and overall health because you have the right to know how your body works and how artificial hormones disrupt that natural process. I host live coaching programs to help you achieve optimal fertility and health because it's important to have healthy menstrual cycles regardless of whether or not you want to have babies. I'm also a wife and mother of 2 beautiful boys. I know, I'm a busy girl, but I managed to fit it all in. This podcast is designed to empower you to take full control of your cycles, your fertility, and your overall health. And I'm so excited that you're here with us today. I'm excited to share today's episode with you. Today, I am sharing an interview that I recorded with Dr. Elizabeth Kissling. I had read a few of her articles online and decided that I needed to interview her just because of the way that she talks about menstruation and periods and birth control and really brings a lot of the issues to light in a way that acknowledges the role of birth control, historically, feminism, but also really challenging and questioning what we're being taught about it. And so we dive into period positivity, get into some of her research, the research that she's done with youth and teens and their ideas and understanding and perspective on periods. So lots of great information coming at you. So without further ado, let's jump into today's episode with Dr. Kissling. And I'm really excited to welcome my guest today, Dr. Elizabeth Kissling, to the show. She is a professor of women's and gender studies at Eastern Washington University, where she teaches courses in feminism and women's studies, gender and media, sexuality studies, gender health issues, and related topics. She shares in her bio that her pronouns are she and her, and her research focuses on women's health, bodies, and feminism, and especially how these issues are represented in the media. Her new book about abortion, activism, and social media is called From a Whisper to a Shout. And in today's episode, we're going to be diving into the topic of birth control, how it's represented in the media, how that has shifted throughout the years. And we get into some really interesting just research and topics on birth control. So without further ado, welcome to the show, Dr. Kissling.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, I'm so glad that I have an opportunity to talk to you. We've kind of had a few conversations back and forth, and I first became aware of your work because of an article that was posted about the pill. And I think I was just like pumping my fist in the air when I was reading it, because basically a lot of the things that you share are similar things that I share, that it's really important for women to have informed consent. We need to really just know what's going on. It's not about bashing hormonal birth control or saying that you shouldn't have access. It's just about really educating women. So we're all in the same playing field with knowledge. So with that said, I just want to get a sense from you. What inspired you to focus so much in this area with your career and with your writing and with your work?
The pill or on menstruation generally?
I think either.
Okay.
Somehow in my mind, they're always related.
They are these days for sure. They weren't when I first started, because I started writing about menstruation in graduate school. My PhD is actually in communication with an emphasis on feminist studies. So these days I list it as feminist cultural studies, and that covers broadly the things that I'm interested in. But I was looking for a topic that would let me explore the relationship between the mind and body and how that's mediated through language. Because even though, I think of our body as something we know intimately, but it's always somehow expressed in language and communication, or we have to put it into language to be able to understand it to ourselves, or to a physician if we're seeking medical care, or to a partner or a friend if we're talking about it. So I wanted some kind of topic that would let me do that. And I was especially interested in women's mind-body relationship, and the more I got into it later and how it's discussed in public discourses. But in grad school, I wasn't thinking that far ahead yet. And I wanted something that was especially important to women. And I was thinking in those days exclusively women, although I don't think in those terms anymore, because we know gender is a spectrum. But I started looking at kind of body image and weight, and I've written a little bit about that. But that's not really exclusively women, and it felt like there were so many people studying that. I wanted something a little different, and I read Emily Martin's book, The Woman in the Body, which is a study about the phenomenological experience of menstruation and how it's constructed in a capitalist society, how women of different positions in society experience it differently. In her study, she found, for instance, that women in the working class tended to have a more experiential description when they described their menstrual and childbirth experiences, whereas women in middle and upper classes tended to talk about menstruation and childbirth more in terms of textbooks. And I was at the same time doing a graduate minor in folklore studies, where I was learning a lot about narrative and storytelling, and how people use narrative to make sense of experience. And I took another class, was offered through the phys ed program in kinesiology, about sociology of the body. So all of these things kind of were swirling together in my thinking. And I thought about menarche, the first period, and how everyone remembers their first period. Almost everyone. I've met a few people who say they don't, but almost everyone remembers. And they have a story about it. They remember, and I see you're kind of smiling.
That I'm remembering mine.
Yeah, that there's some kind of, you remember it pretty vividly, whether you knew it was going to happen or whether you were taken completely by surprise, whether it was embarrassing or not embarrassing, whether it was a special moment and you got a gift from your mother and your aunties or whatever it was, you remember it. So I had the idea to study women's and girls' experiences of their first period. So I did my PhD thesis on first periods, and I wanted to look at as much different kinds of communication about it. So I did my PhD on menarche, and I reviewed the literature, of course, but I also interviewed adolescent girls, about their first periods, what they had learned about it, and where they had learned about it. And based on where they had learned about it, then I looked at their junior high textbooks. I looked at teen magazines, because that was their favorite source. And this was the 90s, so we didn't have social media yet. But they really liked a magazine called YM.
I had a subscription to YM.
Yeah. I think I'm quite a bit older than you. And when I was a teen, it was called Young Miss. And I think it had evolved to YM by the 90s. But it had a column, and I've forgotten now what it was called, but it published embarrassing moments.
Yeah. And oh my gosh. This is like my junior high, and you're fully letting me re-experience this.
You're probably about the age of the girls I interviewed in the early 90s. Yep. Yeah, because most of the embarrassing moments in the column, there were lots of things that were embarrassing, but there were so many apparently about menstruation.
It's always the periods. I remember that because I literally did have a subscription to YM and it was my
Of
favorite
course you
thing.
did.
You're right when you say the vast majority of experiences were period, someone seeing your tampon, bleeding everywhere. And you were
Hmm.
looking at it as an adult, examining it. I was experiencing it as a preteen,
Exactly.
mortified for all these girls. And it was my greatest fear.
Yes, yes, and that's what I was learning talking to these girls, and I mean no disrespect in the least to the girls. Teenage girls are so underestimated. They are so smart and clever and funny. I do not mean any disrespect at all to teenage girls, but they told me magazines, it was for most, it was embarrassing talking to their moms, they said, but not all of them. Some had really wonderful, close relationships, and their moms were very open through their entire childhoods about their own experiences. And some of the moms thought they were, but their daughters saw things a little differently. Like I had one mother who, I also interviewed the moms. For instance, I had one mom who said, "Oh, I remember her first period. I remember it so vividly." The daughter said no. The daughter told me a completely different story, because the daughter said that she didn't tell her mother till the second or third time because she needed supplies, where she had been able to, somehow either get them herself, or I think she must have been getting them from her mom's stash, but they were traveling on her second or third one. And the mom says, "Oh, I remember it vividly. We were visiting family in Texas," and on and on. But that wasn't the daughter's first period.
That's interesting.
So, yeah. But that was, one of the things that I learned in the study. But, but anyway, I went to all the different sources. So I talked to parents, I talked to their junior high teacher, I looked at the book the teacher used, I looked at the magazines. And today, of course, I'd have to be looking at social media, be looking at things like Snapchat and TikTok. And in fact, there was a really funny thing going around TikTok just about a month ago, where teen girls were posting videos of themselves talking about how strange it is that the boys don't believe them when they tell them, that teen boys don't believe them, that when they tell the boys that they're eating their used tampons after their period to make up for all the blood loss. And they were posting this and sharing this and reposting it. And some of them were posting this with boys in the video. And it was so funny because, some of the boys were just, you could just see their eyebrows flying up so high, their baseball caps were knocked off their heads. And the girls were just having fun mocking them. And that's something so different from what was going on 25 years ago. A little more than that, I have to do some math. But, so there's so many more sources of information today. But that's what I wrote about, was this whole intertextual world of communication about menstruation, which was still limited, because one of the main findings was that the girls felt like they were getting lots of scientific information. Like they felt like they understood what was happening with ovulation and the buildup of the uterine lining and that, but they felt like they weren't getting information like, well, how many pads am I going to need? How many do I carry in my backpack? Do I need like one? Do I need 7? What's going to happen when it starts? Is it all going to come out at once? Am I going to have to run? Because they felt like they weren't getting that kind of information, even though they felt like they had plenty of sources. Nobody said, "Hey, Liz, can you tell me more about what's going on with my fallopian tubes?" But they still had a lot of questions about the lived experience.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's really interesting what you said about the practical information and questions, because none of that, I don't even think it occurred to me to ask back then when I was learning about that. But those are very important questions. I didn't get those answered until I experienced it myself either. As you went through and spoke to so many young girls about their first experience and then interviewed their mothers as well, did you find any other themes that stood out, or did anything really surprise you?
The other thing that I found, and I wrote one of my first articles based on the dissertation, was about the language they used, because there was a lot of euphemistic language. They used slang terms, or they used what is in linguistics called deixis, where they just used a pronoun. They used it. Did you get it yet? I have, or they would say, I haven't started yet. And everybody knows what you have or haven't started, or coming back from the bathroom and telling your friends, ugh, I started today. And I actually did word counts, and that was back when I just had to count through with the textual software. I didn't have to count by hand, fortunately, but going through every use of the word started. And I think there was almost never an object after that verb. It was, have you started yet? I started today. I haven't started. Every time the girls used the word started, they never said what had started. So I found some interesting language patterns. So that was another pretty interesting finding. And the other one was not really surprising, but of course they were absolutely mortified, just like in the magazine column, to have boys know anything about periods. And boys included dads and brothers. They didn't want dad to know. And of course, mom always tells dad if they were in a 2-parent family, because dad is a boy. But, so that was, and I was like, well, I get it. My dad still doesn't know, So I wasn't surprised by that, but that was, of course, one of the findings. Huh. And I don't know how much that part has changed. Like you say, girls are probably talking about it more openly because they're talking on social media. I don't think sex and menstrual education is any better, judging from what I see in my classrooms today. I teach courses on sexuality, and I've just in the last year or so taken over a class that's called Women's Health Issues. And we've just changed the name and we're revising it a little bit. It's now going to be called Gender Health and Marginalization. But I do talk about menstruation and some of my research, and talk about the marketing of birth control, which I think is the article you said you first found. But when I talk about menstruation in that class, and sometimes I'll ask the students, so where in the body does menstruation begin? And ask them, where does it start? And they'll often say something like the uterus or the vagina. Nope, back up. And then they might say the ovaries. But nobody ever, knows, no, it starts in the pituitary, the hypothalamus, hypothalamus, pituitary, and then the ovaries. And it's a long time before we ever get to the vagina. So, the junior high students I talked to in the 90s all said, oh, we know all about that. We don't need to know any more about that. We get plenty of scientific information. Tell me about the practical stuff. So, but there's also been a decline in sex education in the United States. You're in Canada, so maybe it's better. But starting in the 90s, as part of the huge Welfare Reform Act that Bill Clinton signed in 1996, there was abstinence-only sex education attached to that had extremely restrictive criteria for sex education. If you wanted federal funds, schools had to conform to these 8 criteria that required sex education to be abstinence only and to promote abstinence ahead of using any birth control. And so a lot of American students between the 90s and the middle 2000s pretty much abandoned any kind of medically accurate, age-appropriate developmental sex education. It started to return, but it's really a patchwork in the U.S. now. I think, what is it? I can't remember the current numbers. It's around 23 states that do have sex education.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not obviously a current junior high student now, and my kids are not at that age. My kids are in kindergarten and elementary. So I do have some hope that it's a bit better, but there's still contentious issues here. There's a continual debate as to whether or not we should teach consent in high schools. Don't get me started on that. Yeah. And then, of course, one of the biggest parts of my work, my one-on-one work with women, is educating them on the menstrual cycle. Because even though we're told some stuff, no woman is educated about, I shouldn't say no woman, but the vast majority of women are not educated about their cervical fluid, how it relates to their ovulation, how it relates to their fertility, let alone how your fertility changes with age, and let alone birth control and what the side effects are. I mean, so it's interesting because I would imagine that a lot of young people would say, yeah, I was given lots of information, but you don't know what you don't know.
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, if teenagers knew about cervical fluid, that could make such a difference in teen pregnancy. Just that one bit of information, knowing that the cervical fluid means you're probably fertile. Just that one little thing could make such a huge difference.
Well, and also if we educated boys about condoms and educated
Mm-hmm.
them to take responsibility, that could also
Well,
help.
that too, yeah.
And also with cervical fluid, from a practical standpoint, going back to YM and all of those scary
Mm-hmm.
moments, if you know that cervical fluid is associated with ovulation and you ovulate in, if you have an average cycle, you ovulate in the middle. So you can expect your period about 2 weeks later. That information
Mm-hmm.
can be very, that's so important for a teenager. There many teenage girls, I feel like I can honestly say this, but many teenage girls might opt to go on the pill because they just don't want to be surprised. They just want to know when their period is coming because they're so nervous about having an accident at school, which was my absolute biggest
Mm-hmm.
fear ever.
Mm-hmm. And lots do. Lots of young women tell me they're on the pill to regulate their cycle.
Yeah. Well, so let's talk about that. So,
Sure.
I just want to kind of get into then your stance on birth control and what you feel is the biggest issue related to young women and their use of birth control.
I think the biggest issue is exactly what you were just saying, is that young women don't have enough information about how birth control works and how their bodies work. And young men as well. Young men don't know much about birth control and how women's or men's bodies work. I talk about some of this work in some of my classes, and it's very successful in class because and they're surprised that they don't know this much. They're a little frustrated and a little angry that they've made it into their 20s without ever learning about it. So young women just, like I say, so many are prescribed the pill to regulate their cycle. And I say, but it doesn't regulate your cycle. It shuts it down. It completely shuts it down. And they don't understand that. And we have to do a lot of explanation. And it even comes up in sneaky ways sometimes. One of my favorite classes that I teach is gender and media and popular culture. And we were watching how, I didn't send you this paper. I know I overwhelmed you with articles, but I wrote a paper a couple of years ago about how reproductive health, sexual health, is discussed in television comedy. And I looked at the Mindy Project and Girls and New Girl and Two Broke Girls. And I was talking about this with one of my classes. And I think it's a good thing because, so many kids don't get good sex education. So young people watch this and there's some evidence that they're actually getting more information from these shows. So it's important when shows do it well. Some television shows actually have consultants to help them do it well. Not all of them. Some of them miss when they do it. But there was an episode, I showed a clip from Girls where the character Hannah was confronting an old boyfriend, accusing him of giving her HPV. And she said that it couldn't be my current boyfriend. He was tested and he doesn't have it. And the old boyfriend, who's actually now dates exclusively men, said, oh, he was tested. He told you that. Yes, he was tested and he doesn't have it. And he called her out because there's no test for men. And my students, totally losing track of what we're discussing, said, is that true? Is there no test for men? And I said, yeah, that's true. Men are at very low risk for cervical cancer. Why is that?
Given that they don't have a cervix.
Well, so I didn't say that. I said, why is that? And the whole class just kind of dropped their jaw and looked at me for a minute. And I said, all right, let's have an anatomy lesson. And I pulled up some images from Google Images, and we talked about why men are at low risk for cervical cancer. And I won't say all of them didn't know that. But this was a class of college juniors and seniors. This was maybe 4 years ago. And a large number did not know. Now, from some of the writing they did for class later, I saw that some of them did know, but were embarrassed to talk and didn't want to talk about that. But a lot of them genuinely didn't know what a cervix was, didn't know who had or didn't have it.
Yeah. Well, and so in a sort of unrelated but sort of similar scenario, I did a live presentation last year, and I was talking about perfect use, quote unquote, perfect use or correct use of different types of non-hormonal contraceptive methods. And so I talked about condoms, and I was shocked that the vast majority of the women in the room, and this has continued to this day, because now I start to ask if I'm doing like a group program, I'll ask all the women, the vast majority of the women in the room didn't know that you couldn't use oil with condoms. So if anyone's listening right now and didn't know that, if you just, either YouTube it, so YouTube condom use and oil, or take a condom if you have one in your house and put it over your hand, and then take whatever oil, if it's Vaseline or coconut oil or whatever, and rub it on the condom. Eventually the condom will totally disintegrate. Yeah. But baby it's a oil. Basic, baby oil, even organic expeller pressed coconut oil. I always like to say that because people think it's coconut oil, it's natural. No, it's still going to break the condom. It's good for you. Yeah. And so what we're talking about essentially is basic information. We are at such a pitiful level of sex education in our countries that you have an entire population that doesn't even know they can't use oil with condoms. So whenever I see, women saying, because basically, so you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my perspective is that things really shifted. So I did grow up, in the 80s and 90s. I was born in the 80s, grew up in the 90s. And so when I was growing up, it was very different. The sex education was very much like, and I also went to a Catholic school. So my sex education went like this: don't have sex or you'll get AIDS and die. Use a condom every time, because if you don't use a condom, you're going to get AIDS and die. Like it was the 90s, and AIDS was all that they talked about in the 90s. So when I grew up, it was all condom. Even if you're using birth control, use a condom. And I grew up learning that condoms were effective, that they were 98% effective in preventing pregnancy. And when I became sexually active, I actually opted for condoms over birth control because I was so concerned that I would miss a day of birth control and it wouldn't work. So in my mind, it was like, well, if I'm using birth control, I always have to use condoms. So I'll just use condoms. And now we're completely the opposite. And there's so many people out there that are actively saying condoms don't work. And so many women who I see will say, I had condoms break on me 5 times. So for me, I'm like, really? I'm thinking that people really just don't know how to use condoms.
And knowing that about the oil now, I see how they could say they break.
Exactly. Yeah. Condoms don't break. They don't. Take your fist and you can put it in, like you can pull it into your arm. They don't break unless you add oil.
Yeah. Yeah. And and part of the abstinence only education programs, a lot of those are written by abstinence proponents, and they are anti-birth control. And they tell students that condoms fail one of every 6 times.
That's not true.
It's not true. No, it's not true.
Condoms work. Condoms are an effective.
It's not true at all
when used correctly.
And when used,
yes, use them correctly.
Used consistently and no, it's not hard, and it's not hard to use them every time. But there's also so much shame attached to sexuality, especially for young women, that being prepared for sex has so much shame attached to it. So that's part of the reason that people don't use the non-hormonal methods consistently, is because it means acknowledging that you want to have sex and that you're prepared for it. So you're carrying your diaphragm or your condoms. And of course, they don't know what a diaphragm is. That's one of the least popular methods. But anyway, back to the condom. They're actively taught in schools that condoms fail one of every 6 times, which comes from some statistic about an 85% effectiveness. That's not, which isn't true. That's based on actual use, which includes all the times it stays in the drawer.
Well, yeah. I
mean, as you well know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and what I find to be kind of one of the biggest differences is that because the kind of default is that condoms don't work that well. Now a woman has to be on birth control. So now we're at a stage where if you're not on birth control, you're basically considered to be a sitting duck. Like it's just a matter of time until you get pregnant. So not being on birth control is equated with being pregnant. And so and it's based on basically a foundation of misinformation and
Mm-hmm.
lack of information, because most women have no idea how their body works. They're taught that they could get pregnant every day of their cycle. They're taught that
Mm-hmm.
they'll just get pregnant at any time, like absolutely get pregnant at any time. And so it's just a very interesting landscape and climate, because it really, if you believe as a woman that you could get pregnant
Mm-hmm.
every single day, and you think that it necessarily will happen, and you don't understand how your cycle works, and you don't understand cervical fluid, you don't understand that really it's not you that's fertile all the time, it's him. He's the one that's shooting out sperm all the time, and you're the one that only has a short window. Like, if you don't understand that, it really sets the stage for birth control. So, you mentioned something about birth control and marketing. So, in the work that you've done, maybe just share a little bit about your
Mm-hmm.
perspective on how it's marketed and why that's a
Yeah.
problem.
Well, yeah, because that's what the thing that interests me as a communication scholar and as a feminist communication scholar is all these discourses about birth control that we have right now. The paper that I think is the first one that you read that led you to invite me to be on the show was called Pills, Periods, and Post-Feminism. And I was looking at the marketing for Seasonal and Seasonique. And this was the first birth control pill that was approved to be taken continuously. And this is birth control that's marketed not for contraceptive effectiveness, but to stop your period. Like a few minutes ago, you talked about, girls wanting to take the pill so that they're never surprised by their cycle. And that's exactly how it's marketed. It's how some birth control formulas are marketed now, so that you don't have to have your period interfere with your life. And it depends, for this marketing to be successful, which it is, because menstruation is still widely stigmatized and misunderstood. And it's another case of not understanding bodies and not knowing how they work, and that there are health benefits to menstruation. Girls do want to start taking the pill early. And even if they don't take it continuously, like the seasonal and seasonique is I don't, for your listeners, that you take the pill instead of taking 3 weeks on and 1 week off, you take it for 3 months and take a week off, and then you take it for 3 more months. So you would have basically 4 periods a year. And so you're taking these synthetic hormones for not only more time during the year, but the way it's marketed, you also start taking it younger. Because if you start taking it in junior high, you start taking it maybe around age 13 or 14. Now, I grew up in the 70s, and we started to take the pill younger than when it first came on the market. I mean, when the pill first came on the market, women took it. They were usually in their 20s. They were married. The pill was first approved as birth control for 1960. And it was only prescribed for married women initially. It actually took Supreme Court cases to get it available for single women, and actually to get it available across the country even for married women. It was a 1965 Supreme Court case that made it available in every state for married people. That's what the United States was like. But anyway, so like for my generation, and I'm 56, so, and I took the pill for a while as a teenager, and I was 17. And the pill didn't work for me for reasons that aren't relevant right now. I'll talk about them if you want. But anyway, the larger point is, for women of my generation and older, we would take the pill at maybe 17, 19, 20, and we would take it. Women of this generation would take the pill till we had babies, if we were going to have them, and then usually opt for a more permanent method. We would get sterilized, or our partners would get sterilized. And that would be it. So we would have the pill for, let's say, from age 16 to 35, so roughly 20 years, time out for babies. So maybe 15 years of 3 weeks on, 1 week off, if we were pill users for that entire time. So but if you start taking the pill today, and you started at, say, 13 or 14, and you're taking it to suppress your cycle, okay, so you're taking it more than just 3 weeks on, you're taking 3 months on, so you have less time off the pill. And you take it from 13, and then if you have babies, you take some time off then, and then you go back on it, and you stay on it till menopause. Now you're talking 13 until 50, 55. So now you're talking 40 years of being on the pill. And while, yes, the pill is one of the most studied drugs ever, and it's widely considered to be safe, although there are side effects, there are risks.
And don't forget that black box warning.
Yeah, the black box warning on some versions. And yeah, we can talk about that too. But we don't know the long-term effects of taking the pill for 40 years. So we've got this whole generation of women that are guinea pigs because we don't know what's going to happen.
I just wanted to jump into today's episode with a quick message from the show sponsor, Conceiving with Fertility Awareness. This is my free online course designed to help you utilize fertility awareness strategies to optimize your chances of conceiving naturally. From timing sex accurately every single time to identifying potential fertility issues through charting, this course has you covered. Head over to fertilityfriday.com/TTC for access. That's TTC as in trying to conceive. Again, that's fertilityfriday.com/TTC. Now let's jump back into today's episode. So as you mentioned, women going on it at age 13, I recently interviewed a couple of women who had issues with their cycles. I interviewed a woman who she didn't get her period. Now, I was interviewing her because she had some serious side effects on the pill. She had experienced multiple blood clots in her lungs, and she almost died. So that's the primary reason why I was interviewing her. But in the interview, she shared that she was put on the pill either at age 14 or 16, don't quote me, I can't remember exactly, but from memory, because she never got her period. So it's like now, and then when we talk deeper, I mean, she was very athletic. And so there's all the signs of an actual health issue that a doctor should pick up on, like hypothalamic amenorrhea induced by excessive exercise and not enough food. So it's like kind of textbook example of that condition. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not diagnosing her, but I'm just saying like that's a textbook example of that, why her period was not coming. But so for me, that was actually the first time I had heard someone specifically say to me that they were prescribed the pill before they even had their menarche.
Yeah, I've heard of a lot of women having it young. I don't think I've heard of any start having it before their period. But I've had a lot of students talk about being put on the pill for all kinds of reasons unrelated to birth control. And that's something that I find really interesting too, is because, they seem quite defensive about it. Not angry defensive, but especially when we talk about the political context, when so many of our legislators want to restrict access, and make it harder to get and defund Planned Parenthood. And so many young women say, but I'm not even taking it for birth control. And I have so many reactions to that. Reason one is, it's okay to take it for birth control. I'm not anti-pill, I'm anti-taking it and not understanding why and not knowing well enough what your options are. And I'm just taking it to regulate my periods, or I take it because I have bad cramps, or I take it just to clear up my skin. And that's actually the one that's most baffling to me. It would seem to me that there's ways you could manage bad skin that wouldn't require a systemic solution. But I'm not a doctor either. So
yeah, I mean,
not that kind of doctor. It's like I say, not the kind who helps people.
Well, see, I feel like when you said, because I think that was one of the statements in the article that I read resonated with, like, it's the largest uncontrolled experiment on women's bodies. Like, and it really is the largest uncontrolled experiment that's ever taken place in the history of the world, to just put women on the pill for whether it's 5, 10, 20, 30, or 40 years. And one of my main concerns, I mean, just from a logical standpoint, okay, let's take a teenage boy. Let's take it out of a girl. So biologically male teenage boy. So we know that at some point we go into puberty, and we know that there's a period of time where the hormones that our body produces, stimulated by our pituitary, they cause all the changes. So if you are, male and you have puberty and you start producing these androgens, that causes all of the changes. And the same, similar as a woman. So, and I'll get to my point, but when I was a teenager and I went through puberty, it took several years for my breasts to fully develop. I started with little breast buds, and they didn't really fully mature into adult breasts until I was an adult. And then when I had children, they changed again. And so you can see where I'm going with this. So a menstrual cycle also has to mature, you know? And when a woman goes through, like when you start having your periods take a couple of years to become really robust and really normal and really healthy, and for everything just to mature and for you to get to that adult menstrual cycle stage. And there are multiple studies that show there's an interesting, the Traylor study that looked at, I think, over 250,000 menstrual cycles, women of different ages. And he defined specific periods. He called it, well, I don't remember but it was the first 5 years or so. There was statistically, like the cycles were quite a bit longer, quite a bit more regular, but then he coined like the middle life phase where they became more robust. And then there was the pre. So what I'm saying is, when you're giving a girl birth control when she's 13, you're not even like, we're at the point where we're just forgetting that children also just need to develop, like they're children. And there's a period of time when their bodies are supposed to develop. We're interfering with this natural process, and we have no concerns about her overall lifetime health. And we don't even have do we really have any evidence to confirm that it's okay to do that?
I'm not an expert in that area. I do know from my conversations with Geraldine Pryor, who's an endocrinologist, that it does really interfere with bone health.
Absolutely.
Is one of the things. And is it okay? We don't know. We don't know that it's okay. We have some pretty strong suggestions that it's not. Geraldine Pryor has done a lot of work on how ovulation is linked to bone health. And so, you put someone on the pill at 13 and she will have the osteoporosis of an 80-year-old by the time she's 30. I mean, not every time, obviously, but because ovulation is so closely linked with that. And I would refer someone to Geraldine's work at SEMCOR, Center for Menstrual and Ovular. Oh, I can't remember.
I don't remember the acronym stands for, but CEMCOR. And I'll link. I've done 2 episodes with her, so I'll link those to the show notes page. But I mean, her work really illustrates the importance of a regular ovulatory cycle for the development and maintenance of normal bone development. And and women don't reach peak bone mass until, say, their 30s or even later. And when you start suppressing a woman's ovulatory cycle at the age of 13, you actually set her up to potentially never actually reach peak bone mass. So we do have evidence showing that this could be harmful. So in one of the articles that you sent to me, you were talking about some of the side effects. And in like one of the headings is like, what's so bad about the pill anyways? So as we kind of, although I could stay in our conversation all day, as we kind of start wrapping up, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of those side effects and maybe just touch on why it is that everybody thinks it's completely harmless.
Yeah, that's another thing that's fascinated me. I did, I ran the blog for the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research for a few years. So I had a Google alert of all things period related and a couple of other ways of checking. And I came across, and I noticed this on our site, that discussions about birth control side effects would get a lot of comments, and I would get alerts on these. In fact, we had one on our blog. One of our bloggers wrote a post about Depo-Provera and side effects, and that ran for quite a long time with users responding, people who'd had bad side effects on that. And I saw these ongoing threads where women talking about side effects of birth control. And I got so intrigued by this. And I was also influenced by Holly Griggs-Spall, who I know you've interviewed a couple of times. She's does some great work on that. And I saw these threads and started looking closely at what was going on. Is because there aren't the side effects, and the pill is presented as so safe, and it's discussed as so safe. You know, they're always saying it's the most studied drug and it's safer than aspirin. There's a lot of move right now to get it available over the counter, which is kind of, I think in some ways it's a sneaky way to get it not covered by insurance in some ways, because if it's available over the counter, then insurance no longer has to cover it. And then we get out of some of those debates, and that it makes it less available for low income users, because I don't know what it costs now. It probably costs about, I would say about $35 if you had to pay full price, is my guess, is around there. I think it costs about $1 a pack to make, maybe less.
Wow.
But when they say it's the most studied, it's so safe, because it's been in use since 1960. So we've got 60 years of it. But what that ignores is it's not the same drug. When we say the pill, we're talking about so many different formulations. The original pill in 1960 was very strong. The one that I took in 1980 was maybe a tenth of the drug in 1960. And the one in 1980 isn't the same one that's available that Holly was writing about, because one of the things about the pill is that it's, when I say it's advertised now for a menstrual suppression drug rather than birth control, because there's no need to advertise it as a birth control drug. They're all equally effective. One of the things about advertising is it's very difficult to market something against its competitors when there's no difference. All birth control pills are equally effective at preventing pregnancy when they're used correctly. You take it every day, it works. So there's no way to sell one as better than any other. So they have to keep tinkering with it to make it better. So Seasonel's selling point was, you take this one all the time and you never ever have a period. That's what makes it different. It's not any more effective than any other pill. And if you listen to them when they read all the extra warnings really fast in a pharmaceutical ad, which in the US, they can sell pharmaceutical drugs over the counter directly to consumers. Not over the counter, I'm sorry, direct to consumers. They can advertise direct to consumers. So we see ads for birth control. And US and New Zealand are the only countries that do that. So they have to come up with some way to advertise it. So they keep changing the formulations. The pill that Holly wrote about is Yaz and Yasmin, and they have drospirenone, which is a fourth generation progesterone. So that tells you there's been 4 different formulations of progesterone since the early versions. So they keep changing it. So this version of the pill is different. And the 4th generation progesterone, drospirenone, and Yaz and Yasmin, and there's a couple of generic versions, that is the one that has triggered all these pulmonary embolisms and the black box warning. They had an FDA panel considered withdrawing it from the market. And I think you probably have talked with Holly about that, and probably others as well. And they voted to keep it on the market by a 4-vote margin. And just by coincidence, perhaps, 4 people on that panel had financial ties to that birth control pill. There were 3 people from Bayer and 1 from a company that made the generic. So one of the things that's happening, why they keep saying it's safe, is misleading, because they're not actually talking about the same pill every time.
I had a really fantastic aha moment, to use Oprah's language, because I had never really thought about it that way. When you said they all are equally effective, so we have to come up with a reason why you should take this one, that really clicked for me, because you're right. And I just never thought of it that way. But if you're a consumer, how would you identify which one to take over the other? I mean, even for the doctor, how are they going to say which one they're going to recommend over another? And so it really comes down to advertising, marketing, and which companies are going into the doctor's offices and promoting their particular products so that the doctor recommends that one. So it's interesting because, I am not anti-pill, even though I come across very anti-pill. What I always say is that we have the right to choose. We need to have access to all these medications. But my whole thing is that we need to understand, it's informed consent. We need to understand what's going on. But what's interesting is so many women get and it makes sense. Women had to fight to get access to the pill, and women have to fight to continue to have access to the pill. So there's a lot of emotion in there. But at the same time, the companies that create the pill are not trying to improve your health. The pill is not something that was ever designed for health. It was the first drug ever designed to give to healthy people who did not have a health condition.
Exactly. That's absolutely true. Yes. Yeah. But you're right. It's not designed for, it's definitely
designed
for profit.
To shut down the endocrine system, because
And
that's how it works. Or
that's
not
how
to
it
shut
works.
down the endocrine system, but to shut down normal ovulatory function.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, people are worried about consuming, pesticides on their food. People are switching to organic meat, and then they're popping a birth control pill that is the mother of all endocrine disruptors, because it's designed to disrupt your endocrine system. And we don't think of it that way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So they keep, and the other part of that is not just the marketing, but it's also to keep it profitable. Because if they're all, the patent is only valid for so long on a medication. So we have to change it or come up with something else for it to treat. So, for instance, there's been a couple different versions of Yaz and Yasmin. That's why the names are slightly different. Like there was one that was out for a while that had vitamin B mixed in it. It was called B-Yaz.
Yeah, they put folate in it, even though they adamantly say that the pill doesn't deplete folate.
Mm-hmm. But that way they can get a new patent. Or Cerafem was marketed for PMDD. And Eli Lilly, the drug company that manufactured it, they're the manufacturers of Prozac. And the patent on fluoxetine was about to expire. So what they did was they helped get PMDD into the DSM and started marketing fluoxetine as Cerafem as a unique treatment for PMDD. And that is taught in business schools as a case study. In brilliant marketing, you create the need and then you sell the product you've created for it. And so that's
very enlightening.
So it's capitalism.
Yeah,
that's what's going on here, and that is part of how the pill. Why is it? Yeah.
So
how is it marketed? How is it that we could continue to perceive that it's safe? Because it is profitable.
Wow.
For us to believe that.
So something that you said that I didn't realize, so I'm just reiterating because I feel like I need to chew on it.
Okay. Yeah, okay. I was trying to think, is there anything else I need to say? Yeah.
But what you said was that the patent is only valid for so long. And then, of course, and see, this is also an important thing about the pill that I've been going on about for years, but it's not progesterone, it's not estrogen. Because in order to patent a drug and sell it and make money off of it, you can't patent nature. So you have to create a synthetic version that's similar enough to the natural estrogen that it's going to make your body respond, but it's different enough so that you can put your name on it, label it, and sell it. Mm-hmm. So what you're saying is you go through all this trouble to create whatever Levinstrel, estro, estriol, whatever. So you create your thing, you make you put the name on it, but it only is valid for so long. And so in order for the pill companies to continue to make money, every so many years, they have to come up with a new formulation, or they have to come up with some sort of spin, because once the patent is over, anybody can make
other companies can make it.
Anybody can make it and sell it. So it's no longer profitable for you. So it's no
longer as profitable. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make, because of course you can always make a profit, but that is such an important point that I also had never considered.
Yeah, and I should be clear though, I am only familiar with how it works in the US, and I don't know if it, how it works in other countries. But in the United States, it has really, really changed drug marketing over the last generation or so, and research and development in drugs in pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies in the US spend more on marketing than they do on research and development. And marketing not just to doctors. They spend up more than $60,000 a year per doctor in the US on marketing to doctors. So, every physician in the United States, there's at least $60,000 spent on advertising just to that doctor. And that's since they have actually changed some of the rules. They used to do all kinds of freebies to doctors. You would go see your doctor for something and you would see, pens and clocks and notepads and all kinds of stuff with drug names and pharmaceutical names. And that has all been restricted in recent years in the US. And they're still spending a lot of money marketing. There used to be like cruises and junkets and stuff. And they've really they've restricted a lot of that in recent years. And there's still a lot spent on marketing to doctors. And the United States also advertises prescription drugs directly to patients. And that has only been going on for the last 20 years. There are rules about it. I mean, they have to tell you the risks of the drug, and they don't have to tell you all of them, but they have to tell you the most egregious risks. And they have to tell you where you can get more information. So they'll say things like, see our full page ad in the New York Times, visit our website at seasonal.com or whatever. But so, yeah. And so they're always tinkering. And most of the best-selling drugs, like if you looked at, say, the top 20 best-selling drugs in the United States right now, I would bet you that at least half of them, and this is without looking it up, I would bet probably at least half are either new versions of old drugs, like, an extended release version of a drug that came out 5 years ago would be one of them. Another one might be a combination. Like there's enough people in the United States who are taking both a blood pressure drug and a statin to reduce cholesterol that now there is a combination. So you can take the two in one pill. Won't that make your life easier? Take one pill instead of two. You got to take them both every day. Why not just take one? And then, whatever company is making them can make more money because it's a brand new drug. It's not really a brand new drug, but it's a new patent combining the two. So, and birth control has been on the market since 1960. The formula's changed. See, and the other thing that's happening, and that's one of the things I discovered with the study of the women who are quitting the pill, why it's so hard to get information and find out about the side effects is when they go to their healthcare provider and say, yeah, it's great birth control, but I'm really depressed. It's really messing with my moods here. I'm crabby. I cry too easily. It's the pill. And the doctor will say, well, let's try you on a different version. So they try a different brand or a different strength of the same brand. And they need to try it for at least 3 months to know if it's making a difference, right? So you could end up going for 2 years, 4 years, more, just trying different versions, different strengths, different brands. Because there must be 60, 70 different formulas of the pill available in the United States. So somebody could spend 5 years figuring out, no, it's not me. It's hormonal birth control, and I got to get off it. Now, again, it works great for some people. Some people have no problems with it. It's effective birth control, and their skin is beautiful, and they have no problems with the side effects. But for a lot of us, there are problems with side effects. Depression is well known as a side effect, yet it's not contraindicated in prescribing it.
Well, I mean, it's just such a can of worms. There's research that shows that, teenage girls who are on hormonal birth control are significantly more likely to also be on antidepressants. And so even though this is a known side effect of the pill, when a teenage girl is depressed, the doctor isn't going to say, hey, let's try going off the birth control pill for a couple months and see if your symptoms get better. Or if you have anxiety, so a lot of women can't go on the pill and eventually. Sometimes they get it right away. Sometimes it's 8 years in, but they start developing panic attacks and have anxiety symptoms and things like that worsen. And again, instead of saying, okay, we know this is a known side effect of the pill, let's give you, you know what I mean? At least educating, informed consent, letting them know that this could be related to the drug that they're taking. They're going to offer another one. So this is an interesting and very important conversation because, I've been publicly talking about the pill for a long time. And I often get people really pissed off. Like they're really like, how could you smash the pill? There's a few individuals who've read my book, The Fifth Vital Sign, and I have a whole chapter where I go through the research, and I actually go through the research.
Mm-hmm.
I go through all the different information that I found when I was researching the pill. So I'm not making anything up, and it's very specific. And I have had people say like, how could you say this? How could you say that the pill could possibly affect your mate choice? How could you say blah, 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 blah? You're just going to scare women from taking the pill when it's a safe medication. And I don't know what you're talking about. And wouldn't you want to know if you were taking a drug every single day for, anywhere from a couple months to 2 decades that could possibly affect your body in all of these profound ways? How can you be vilified for just telling women the truth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I watched a lot of that happen with Holly when her book came out. There were so many feminists that wouldn't even read it.
Yeah.
She's like, I'll give you a copy, just read it. She got some good reviews and some really bad reviews, and some of the worst reviews were from people who said, I'm not going to read that.
Yeah.
So yeah. Depression, it is. And part of the thing with the depression is that even though there's so much research that shows it's connected, depression isn't defined the same in all the studies, and some of them study it for different amounts of time. So many doctors and clinicians are able to say, we're not that sure. And it's like, we're sure. That's one of the most cited reasons, in the study I did where I looked at all those online forums where women were basically advising each other because they weren't getting the support they needed from the healthcare system. Depression was the most common reason they were giving for quitting the pill.
It's and actually there was something that you mentioned about that was very interesting in the article, because you said something just about the fact that women are experiencing these side effects, but we're not necessarily reporting it. We're not necessarily going to the, FDA or whatever country that you're in, their regulational body. And it occurred to me after reading that, I have a whole series where I've interviewed, I don't know the number, but I've interviewed anywhere from 15 to 20 or more women over the years who just, they took whatever type of birth control and they're talking about their side effects. And then obviously in the work that I do, I've heard hundreds, if not thousands of stories directly from women with their experiences on the pill. And never once, I don't think, have I ever heard a woman say, actually, and then I sued the company, or actually, and then I contacted, like even the 2 that I interviewed who had strokes.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not sure if you wanted to comment on that, because I thought that was interesting that.
Yeah. And I talked about that a little bit in the article, because I don't want to, I don't want to say that women are cultural dupes or anything, but it's a very different climate, because from like the 1970 congressional hearings, when you had a congressman holding hearings about the pill, because he'd read Barbara Seaman's book, The Doctor's Case Against the Pill, and said, yeah, we need to look into this. What are we doing? And that led to the founding of the National Women's Health Network by Alice Wolfson and Barbara Seaman, and it led to the patient package inserts. Now every time you get a prescription in the U.S., you get a printout that's 2 or 3 pages with all of the risks of whatever prescription it is. Those started with the pill, thanks to women's health activism, and we're not in that kind of world today. Our Congress is in the pocket of the pharmaceutical industry. It's hard to imagine that. So there's not as much support for that. And the whole idea of when you go to your doctor and say, I'm having these side effects of the pill, your healthcare provider says, well, let's try a different one.
Yeah.
It's not the first reaction isn't there's something wrong with the medication. It's something's wrong. Well, let's try another one. It's not the right one for you. And our insurance system controls so much about how our health treatments. I'm going through a conflict right now with my insurance company, waiting for them to approve a medication, and they need my doctor to verify that I have failed at least 3 other treatments.
Interesting.
I have failed.
Yes, that language. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there was a study that I cited where the purpose of the study was to look into the characteristics of the women who complained on birth control. That was the purpose of the study. And then even though 50% of the women in the study who used birth control, hormonal birth control, had a side effect that they complained about, the researcher concluded that it's difficult for doctors to prescribe the pill, the most effective birth control options to women, while providing them with full disclosure of the possible risks and benefits without unduly dissuading them from taking it. So it's so hard for doctors. Like, you're just like, I can look at those results too. My conclusion is very different. If half of the women who are taking it are saying, oh, no, this is causing me anxiety, depression, I'm getting low libido, it's, sex is painful and all of that, 50%, 1 out of 2, then that means that the drug is not good enough. And we should be looking at better alternatives for women. But who am I? That's
been the story of the pills from the beginning, from the experiment on the Puerto Rican women who didn't tolerate it very well. The hidden experiment. What did Catherine McCormick say? The cage of women in a cage or something. It was, because they didn't tolerate it very well. And John Rock and what was his name? Gregory Pincus said, women complain a lot.
Yeah. And I mean, like it's just such a rabbit hole. And then the whole reason why we have a withdrawal bleed today is because the women thought they were pregnant when they didn't get their periods, because they didn't understand that the drug was suppressing ovulatory function. So then they added a withdrawal bleed to convince the women that it was the same as being off the pill. So they would still get to have their period. And to this day, that myth prevails and everyone thinks we're getting our periods on the pill when we're not. And now that the pill has been around for so long, now the companies can be really bold and say, okay, we're going to, you can just take it forever. You don't need to have a period. It's not even really a period. It's a withdrawal bleed, because now we're so accustomed to the pill that we're not questioning it. Whereas the women of the 60s were like, wait a minute, I need to get my period because I know this is a sign of health, but we're so past that now.
Well, also John Rock thought that the Catholic Church would consider it natural.
Yes. Yeah. Because it was progesterone, just like in your cycle. And it's just basically the same as having a cycle. Oh my goodness. So you and I could talk all day. This has been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate, we went over, I really appreciate.
Oh, we sure did.
We sure did. Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm sorry because I'm usually the timekeeper, but I was like, oh, this is so good.
Well, thank you.
So I really appreciate you taking the time. We covered a lot of ground. And so there's a lot of really difficult concepts, for women to kind of digest from our conversation. If anything, what would you want to leave her with, the listener who now is kind of like, wow, this is crazy with the drug companies and all this kind of stuff. Like, how do you want her to leave from the conversation?
Yeah, it's a lot to think about. I think I just want to say to think about it and make your choice for yourself. Don't let me persuade you, but think about what you're doing and do some reading. Talk to your trusted healthcare providers. It's never as easy and straightforward as it looks.
Yeah, definitely good advice.
Yeah.
Well,
you only get one body.
This is true. And that's it. So you got to take good care of it. Well, thank you so much for being here, Dr. Kissling. This was just such a informative interview. And I know my audience is going to really I know that this is going to be, I'm really excited actually to see the responses. So where can the listeners go if they want to learn more about you, what you do, look at some of the articles that you've written? I'll link as many as I can.
Okay. Well, I have a website that's at kissling.fyi, just my last name, .fyi, and I have kind of an abbreviated version of my academic CV there. And then there's links to some of the articles, and I have some of my old posts from the blog I used to run for the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research. They closed down the blog a couple of years ago, but I have the stuff I did for it on the blog section of my website. And there's a little bit about my classes, not very much there. Yeah, you can just get a sense of what I teach, and you can contact me through that site. Everything's right there. Okay. And if anybody wants more copies of the articles, they can either use links there or they can contact me through the site.
Okay, perfect. And you teach at the Eastern Washington
University in the Women's and Gender Studies program.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for being here. This has been just such a treat to have you.
Oh, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please share it with a friend. You'll find the show notes page for today's episode over at fertilityfriday.com/298. I hope that you enjoyed today's interview with Dr. Kissling. I mean, wow, so much important information. I loved this conversation. I'm sure you could tell when you were listening how excited I was just to really delve into these topics and to get into some of the nitty-gritties. I mean, one of my main pet peeves is the conversations that occur or don't occur as much today around condoms and how condoms are presented as kind of like a subpar, ineffective method of birth control when they're highly effective when used correctly. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from today's episode was the conversation around patents and how companies organize and arrange their marketing and even their drug formulations around the patents, because these are products that are profitable for these companies, and they really structure a lot of how they are putting them out into the world based on the profitability. And it's so interesting just to think about new formulations of drugs coming out and that really not necessarily being for the benefit of the user, but being for the benefit of the company to ensure that they always have a patent on their particular formulation so that they can maximize the bottom line. I think that these conversations are really important because I think that it's when you're using a drug that has a potential impact on so many different facets of your overall health and your life and your moods and your emotions and all of those things. I don't think that it's wrong to talk about the companies that produce these products and get a clear understanding of what motivates them. And it's important to recognize that many of these drug companies, they are not necessarily primarily motivated to help you in any way. They're primarily motivated to sell products and maximize their profits. And yes, that might sound like I'm casting it with for a brush, but it's really important these days because there's often, if anything, from the podcast, from the Pill Reality series episodes and the Fertility Awareness Reality series, if you could take anything from this body of work that has come out of the Fertility Friday podcast, it's that for many of us, it's a buyer beware type situation. It's really up to us to do the research, to find out about the side effects, because we're often not provided with that information right off the front, right off the top. And many of these companies have multiple motivations for creating these drugs. And it's important to know that. So that was one of the biggest takeaways that I took from this episode, just really learning more about just in general, how companies are structuring their products based on the patent and profitability. And that does funnel down to us and our experiences with these drugs, if they're being formulated not necessarily for our best interest, but for the company's bottom line. So definitely something to think about. We'll be talking about this more in our Facebook group. So if you're not in there yet, fertilityfriday.com/community. I am curious what your thoughts are. Am I being too harsh on these companies by pointing out that they are motivated by profit among other motivations? Or do you think that it's fair to be talking about it in this way? I want to hear from you. So join us in our Facebook group, again, fertilityfriday.com/community. And I want to thank you for spending some time with us today. I want to thank you for tuning into the show, for sharing the show with your friends. If you know of somebody who will benefit from today's episode in particular, this really important conversation that we had, and even touching on how teens are looking at periods and menstruation and how all of these things can affect women and people who are menstruating of all ages. The link is fertilityfriday.com/298. And so with that, I will let you go. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful weekend, whenever you're tuning in. And of course, as always, until next time, be well and happy charting.